Hello and welcome. What level of public outrage would finally bring an end to the rampant corruption found in parts of India's society? Recent cases involving billions of dollars have triggered a demand for accountability. But how does the country move forward in making sure there is a genuine cleanup of white-collar crime? Earlier this month, 72-year-old social activist Anna Hazare held a 4-day hunger strike to pressure the Indian government to form a committee of politicians and social activists to finally come up with an effective anti-corruption bill. Hazare's fast, which attracted people from across the country, was aimed at implementing the Jan Lokpal or Citizens Ombudsman Bill, which would create an independent body to investigate corruption cases in the country. Recent huge scandals involving billions of dollars in the so-called 2G scam and corruption surrounding the hosting of the Commonwealth Games in India have motivated the public to push for institutional change. The new law calls for complete transparency in selection of the Anti-Corruption Committee. It also stipulates the committee will have independence from government interference, and it requires a fully independent police force to investigate corruption within the government. So today we ask, can Indians really expect serious government action against the country's rife corruption, or will it simply remain a way of life? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments by sending an SMS or an email. Joining me now from New Delhi is Kiran Bedi, a social activist who took part in drafting the Jan Lokpal Bill. She was India's first and highest-ranking female police officer, awarded some of the highest prizes in India and the Asia region, and also nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. Dr. Bedi has been voted India's most admired woman and fifth among all Indians. In New York is Jagdish Bhagwati, who is regarded one of the foremost international trade economists. He's currently a professor at Columbia University and a senior fellow in international economics at the Council on Foreign Relations. I welcome you both to the show, and Dr. Bedi, I'll start with you and ask, what's so different about this anti-corruption bill, the Lokpal Bill, in trying to pass it? Is India finally making a serious commitment to try to deal with the topic of endemic corruption?
That's true. That's true. It's today absolutely a national outcry for a demand for an independent anti-corruption authority in India called the Ombudsman. And the citizens have drawn capable criminal lawyers who've been amazingly brilliant in their work. They've come together to draw and draft a very effective Jan Lokpal Bill. And that, once that law is drafted, it will give India the finest independent anti-corruption authority. It's now a national outcry and there's no choice. The fact is that government and civil society now are going to be jointly drafting it after having the views of the civil society. So therefore it's a matter of time. The deadline is 30th of June, given by the Prime Minister, and the notification of this joint draft. So we hope to see the first draft out by 30th of June and to be introduced in the monsoon session of the Indian Parliament. That's a commitment given by the Prime Minister of India.
All right. Why did it take the hunger strike of an elderly activist to trigger this? Why did it take Anna Hazare's action to finally make something move?
It was triggered because there was an absolute lack of sense of urgency. And as very rightly said by you in your introduction, the last 2 years have been years of scams of billions of dollars, from Commonwealth Games to 2G spectrum deals and to land deals. It's been one after the other, and the media played its role in exposing the corruption with evidence. While the media was exposing it with evidence and public was seeing evidence, one was not seeing the sense of urgency in the government. While the change in the leadership in the Supreme Court started to drive the change, and that too revived hope amongst people, but it never saw a sense of compelling urgency on the part of the government. So civil society got together and threatened finally the fast unto death by Anna Hazare. As you know, he's also called the Gandhi from Maharashtra. He's been a reformer and he's been driving right to information reforms in his own state of Maharashtra. So when he came center stage, I think that's where it shook the government. And he did have to sit on a fast unto death till the government recognizes that the nation was behind him.
Let me bring in Professor Jagdish Bhagwati here and ask you, sir, as Dr. Bedi said, this is the first time that civil society will get involved with the government to try to create this bill. What kind of real difference will that make, having the involvement of society in this way?
Well, I hope Dr. Bedi is quite correct in predicting that this is going to be a sea change, a dramatic change in what's happening. I think the fast unto death, which actually lasted only 4 days predictably, because governments are used to giving in any case to fast, which we used to say that this is an instrument to be used against the British, not against ourselves. We have a democratic system, and the Prime Minister went down that route. But in the end, when somebody is actually on a fast, it's very difficult in Indian cultural context to avoid it. I think what happened was that it really essentially was a situation where this fast and the movement around it managed to flag the issue, as Dr. Bedi was pointing out, because everybody was aware that India had changed dramatically from the time when 50 years ago, when I was beginning to worry about Indian planning and so on, and at that time India was actually at the top in terms of its efficient civil service, in terms of its clean politics and independent judiciary and so on. And there's been a sea change after that.
Well, it's interesting, Professor, you were mentioning about this culture that India has, that people are assumed to be corrupt unless they prove otherwise. And I was reading some of the articles where you're quoted as saying that what real difference will this bill and the committee, if and when it's set up, make in terms of creating real accountability?
To some extent, yes, but we have ombudsmen all over the world, like New York Times has it, for instance. Doesn't amount to a hill of beans, I think, in the end. But let's hope that it's at least a step forward. But I think if we want to make a real dent on corruption, we've got to find out why the system got out of hand in this way in the last 50 years. I think you have to go back to the license and permit Raj. This was our policy framework, which corrupted the politicians, corrupted the high-level bureaucrats, and then the low-level bureaucrats also, who then began to charge you money for simply doing what they were supposed to do. Right. The upper-level bureaucrats had to be bribed to do what they were not supposed to do. I think once we begin to break down and disaggregate corruption, I think we'll have a much better handle on how we handle corruption, instead of just saying we need an ombudsman. Right. An ombudsman is desirable, but I don't think it's sufficient.
Okay, Dr. Bedi, let me get an email to you, if I may, from Nabil Salik, who wrote in from India with a comment. And I want to put this to you. It says, "We do have certain laws to prevent corruption. They are not enforced as they should be because the body in charge of enforcing these laws is in itself corrupt. Creating another central body, irrespective of whether it is government controlled or independent, won't help much." I'd like your view on that.
That is where the change will be, because the existing bodies are either advisory or under the political influence or the governmental influence. This new multi-body will not be under the political influence, nor will it be an advisory. It will be prosecutorial, which means that if there is a complaint and which it investigates through its own police force or through its own investigative agencies which it will have, the matter will go to the court, and that too special courts which can then try the matter day to day. At the moment, the current investigating agencies are not free of political influences or extraneous factors, whereas the body which is being proposed is a multi-body. Cannot be politically influenced because it's going to be insulated, like the Chief Election Commission or the Comptroller and Auditor General or the Supreme Court of India. These are insulated. Well, individuals may fall temptations to something, but as institutions they are insulated. At the moment, we do not have an investigative agency in India which is insulated. So the new body which will come through the Jan Lokpal Bill will be insulated. Okay. And will have special courts to go on day-to-day trials. So that's going to be a major departure from the past, and that is why it revives hope.
All right. Well, Professor, I want to get Professor Bhagwati. I want to get to you from you, I guess, some perspective on what's happened recently that has really triggered the kind of public outcry. We have, of course, the so-called 2G scam, which involved billions of dollars, not millions, but billions, at a ministerial level, being siphoned off. Explain what happened and really what kind of reaction that created in India.
Well, I think what it brought out was that the politicians were corrupt, in allocating licenses, and to some extent, I think we'll have increasing evidence on that one, that some of the businesses which were actually going in for these licenses also sort of were were bribing some of the officials. I think what the sum was so dramatic. And coming straight after, as Dr. Bedi pointed out, what had happened in the Commonwealth Games, where in fact India lost reputation rather than gained it, vis-a-vis, say, China. I think all of that concentrated the mind of lots of people that, look, there was something rotten in this kingdom. And I think that is what led to the enormous eruption. And I think what galvanized it all was this particular fast by Mr. Hazare. So I think it was a constellation of different circumstances. But I think what we need to worry about is how do we actually handle it. Now, one obvious thing to do is to have auctions for the licenses. This is something we have really not done enough of. And I think once you have an auction, it's very difficult to fix it. Okay, so I think that's one institutional change we could have. I mean, you could go back to the Enron scandal, where in fact the government was in such a rush to get Enron to sign up that in fact it bypassed the procedure of inviting tenders. And then of course everybody said the government people had taken money. So I think this is one simple institutional feature which I think can be enforced. And two, look at the politicians. I mean, Dr. Bedi knows there are 75 people who are elected members of the parliament who are actually, out of what, over 500, who are actually have criminal indictments, serious crimes of which they are alleged to be. Okay. Now, how do we handle that? We have to have then an independent tribunal to do it, to decide.
Yeah, Professor, it's interesting what you raised there, and I want to get to Dr. Bedi with an email question that came in, and
yes,
perhaps this is one of the solutions. Dr. Bedi, an email that came in from a viewer by the name of Goseki, which came into our Facebook page, says, how free is the media reporting in India? A strong free media is the cornerstone of a corruption-free state. Your perspective on that?
Well, media has been, by and large, been the reason for this exposure. It may be having its own interests, I don't know, because I have no evidence of that. But by and large, I would say that the media, in fact, let me say, all this made great news for the media. It brought in a lot of people watching more of news than anything else. So it actually, all these news became TRPs for the media. So why would media ignore it? And it's been competitive media. You've got hundreds of channels now, and they're all vying for eyeballs. So therefore, the media could not ignore this news. In fact, and if one channel took the lead, the others followed. So therefore, the gainer has been the country as a whole. We, the people, who could see evidence coming through. In fact, media has played a lead role, whether it's for enlightened self-interest or whether it's for national interest, it doesn't matter to me. But as a citizen, and as a watcher, and as a television viewer, I'm the gainer as a citizen, because I could see the evidence unfolding. So I won't go into the reasons for media exposure, but media is certainly a gainer, because it's got many more eyeballs looking at the news, which they would probably would have gone to the movie or the music channels or the serials. But now people do go to the news hour or the program in the evening, which they watch the news. Well, I think it's been a big shift for the media and media for its own. But media did play a role in exposing the corrupt.
Well, let me get Professor Bhagwati a question that came in from a viewer by the name of Fazli Samir, who wrote in. And Professor, this question says, it's a disease endemic to the third world, left behind by a colonial legacy of handing power over to selected brown sahibs under the guise of democracy and franchise. The damage is done. We just have to fix it now. Your view on that?
I think it's, I disagree with that view. It doesn't really apply to India at all, because India actually from the beginning had all the elements of a liberal democracy, and I won't go into why we actually moved into that. For years, India was the only exception as the third world was collapsing into all kinds of non-authoritarian regimes, as you know. And India has always had a free press, a functioning political system with opposition parties, a relatively independent judiciary, and as Dr. Bedi was pointing out, also an increasingly, lively press, which can actually expose things. So we have 4 elements of a democracy, and to some extent, the British Raj before independence can take a little bit of credit for having given us this regime, but it was also compatible with India's traditions, in my view. And so I think we can't. What happened in India was much of it was of our own making. As I said, the license and permit Raj spawned all this collapse of standards in the system and became a little cancer at the heart of our system. And this is what has led to this whole outbreak of corruption and so on. And we got to attack it. But we can't go back to the British people and say they're the ones who are responsible for it. I mean, some of the problem is at our own end.
Okay. Well, Dr. Bedi, an email question here that came in from the USA, and it's a viewer by the name of Kashif Aslam who wrote in saying, transparency has to be incorporated in all transactions in business and the government. Laws have to be revised in such a way that they create more transparency while simultaneously educating people about their rights. And I guess that's the key I want to touch on with you, is that, of course, India is a multi-layered society. How thorough is the effort to try to educate people to the dangers of corruption at every level? Because, of course, it does happen at the smallest level, even in India.
Well, people are being harassed, people are being impacted, people are either a bribe giver or a receiver. And that is why Anna Hazare's fast acted as a spark. It's just sparked because either people were being harassed, or they were being extorted from, or they were onlookers. So therefore, I think that's where the spark worked. But the point is, people are already aware. And that awareness is, and this is now becoming education. The movement of India against corruption, led by Anna Hazare and various other individuals, the key individuals are lawyers like Bhushans, Swami Agnivesh, Baba Ramdev, Arvind Kejriwal, myself, and Sri Ravi Shankar. It's been a coming together of movements, has educated people about the law. This is the first time you've had a campaign which has actually educated people at the grassroots level through the power of the media, print or the television, on this law. Otherwise, legal awareness is so low in this country. Unless you're a law student, you don't read the law. You just listen and you just you're not concerned, you let it be. But this is the first time a common citizen, a middle-class young student, who's not a law student, is talking about a Lokpal Bill. Is talking about the sections of the law. I think that's a big leap forward in education and awareness. But we have a long, long way to go because the governance hasn't made them aware. So therefore, but media also doesn't run campaigns because it is not a part of their CSR, their corporate social responsibility. But the fact that we've had so much of exposure of corruption through the print and through the television media and the magazines competing for space, I think has led to a lot of education of masses on the legal issues of corruption, which is a very good thing, which is a big break from the past.
All right. Well, Professor Bhagwati, let me ask you what you make of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh saying that India is now ready to sign, to ratify the UN Convention Against Corruption. Why has it taken so long also for India to take this step?
That's kind of hard to tell. I really have no theory about that. I think by the UN Convention, you mean the OECD Convention on not giving bribes and taking people to court? Because that we have. I mean, when firms go out from here and then give bribes, partly because they're required to give bribes by the receiving governments, that is actually now a criminal offense in this country, and in many Western countries. I think we've been at the receiving end rather than the, we don't actually invest in a big way abroad. So I think that may have been the reason for it. It wasn't really appropriate to the Indian situation.
Right. One thing, Professor, also is that it's fairly evident now, I guess, that the level of corruption in India has certainly perpetuated the level of poverty that India's experienced. How do you expect things to change if serious counter-corruption measures and the committee and the law do pass? To what degree do you think there's going to be a change in the sort of economic balance in India and the way poverty might be tackled?
Well, I think in the end, while I agree with Dr. Bedi about the need to educate people and so on, in a way, it's I would just say something a little bit contrary to that position and say the people who are actually involved in trying to get their birth certificates, land titles, all sorts of things, are continuously dealing with the lower level bureaucracy. They don't need to be educated that the system is actually one where you have to give bakshish in order to get anything done. They know that from their own experience. To some extent, of course, they go from other people's experience and the in the media. But I think what we need to do is work out again institutional ways in which these people can actually manage. Because supposing if I say I want a certain file out, and the guys and the bureaucrat says I won't get your file out, I won't get your birth certificate out unless you pay me a bribe, what recourse do I have? Because those guys are unionized to begin with. Two, if I start complaining and take them to the court or become part of a lawsuit, am I going to be spending years going to the law courts? What do I do? So I think we have to think through how do we do this. My own solution to that is a technological one. Have more things available through the kinds of identity schemes which the government is now trying to evolve with Mr. Nilekani from Infosys. So bypass these guys and then have your birth certificate and whatever you want, which is really a bunch of, about 10 items that any normal human being in the middle class will want. And then you bypass these guys and they will atrophy and get away out of your life. So there are different things we can do, but simply educating people is just only a tiny part of it, because we don't need to be educated. We know about the system.
Okay, well, Dr. Bedi, of course, I want to get your perspective on this because, through your work in the police force, and you've been very active at a grassroots level as well, you have a very clear experience of what society faces and some of the issues there that the professor raised. So let me ask you how you think technology will help turn the country around, and also to what degree the sort of institutionalized concept of corruption might finally dissolve in India.
Well, that's what exactly Lokpal Bill will do, the Ombudsman will do. And technology will provide the kind of transparency it needs. Technology, the camera culture, the tendering on the internet, the exposure, using more of the internet to let people know who is asking for what, how much is it going for. I think that will reduce discretion, and that will provide the sunshine to this breeding of the secrecy. So sunshine, to my mind, is the biggest prevention of this kind of corruption. So I think technology is the route, and once these kinds of institutions are built, because it's not going to be a central ombudsman, it will have a cascading effect on the state ombudsman system, because you will have a central body, and you similarly, which the bodies, 16 states already have it, but they are all weak. The 16 Lok Ayuks, which are the state ombudsmen, are weak. They're advisory. They don't have resources. They don't have independent budgets. So they too will benefit with the central legislation, because it will impact them as well. So you imagine the grievance redressal system will be coming to. That's one of our is to link Lokpal Bill with grievance redressal and the whistleblower. That's a part of our draft of the Jan Lokpal Bill. So grievance redressal, whistleblower, and the state ayuks, which will be empowered. You asked Mr. Bhagwati about the United Nations Convention. Let me tell you about it. It was passed in 2005. It's called the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC. It was passed by UN in 2005. 2011 till now, India did not. It is through G20. It's from the group 20 pressure that government of India came on last year. India is one of the very few countries left who've not signed this, who've not ratified this treaty through the parliament. It is now under pressure to do it. The day the government of India signs that treaty, it needs Lokpal because it has to be backed by legal instruments. That is why the two things, why the government of India did not sign the treaty, because it did not have legal instruments. So I think the two things are going hand in hand, and government of India is under pressure for the next G20 to say we have the system in place.
Okay.
And if India had signed that treaty, India could have asked for its money back from Swiss banks. That's the key. It could have asked for legal assistance in investigation. So I think the government of India tried to avoid it as much as possible and as long as possible, but no more.
Okay. Dr. Bedi and Professor Bhagwati, I thank you both for this discussion. Thank you. We're out of time. Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us too. Now remember, you can follow our program on Twitter. We'll keep you notified on upcoming shows, and you can send us questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, a light-hearted look at the marriage of the century, how royal wedding fever has gripped not only Britain, but a global audience ready for the big event. Make sure you tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.